There's a photograph that exists somewhere in the archives of London's finest hospitals. In it, a man who once commanded stadiums of 80,000 screaming fans lies in a hospital bed, barely recognizable. His family made one request, that the world would never see it. But the truth? The truth came out anyway, just 24 hours before he took his last breath. This wasn't just any secret. This was the kind of secret that ended careers, destroyed families, and forced the most powerful people in entertainment to choose between their privacy and their legacy. It's a chronicle of how silence became complicit in tragedy and how the deaths of these 17 extraordinary individuals forced an entire generation to confront the most devastating epidemic of the modern age. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The very last revelation on this list exposes something far more insidious than the disease itself, something that reveals the true depth of how society failed an entire community. The king who kept his secret until the very end, the 23rd of November 1991. The world woke up to news that seemed impossible. Freddie Mercury, the man whose voice could shatter glass and whose stage presence made him seem immortal, was gone. But what made headlines wasn't just his death, it was his statement. "I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS," Mercury's words read. "I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me." For years, those closest to Mercury had watched him deteriorate. The makeup got heavier. The performances became less frequent. His bandmates and Queen noticed but honored his wish for discretion. Mercury, the flamboyant showman who lived his life in front of millions, wanted this one thing to remain his own. Born Farrokh Bulsara in Zanzibar in 1946, Mercury had always been a study in contradictions. He fled to England with his family during the Zanzibar Revolution, eventually studying graphic design before music became his calling. He was simultaneously the most visible and most private of rock stars. His intimate life was complex, involving relationships with both men and women, though he rarely discussed such matters publicly. In an era when being open about one's private preferences could end a career overnight, Mercury chose performance over confession, spectacle over revelation. The disease had likely been with him since the mid-1980s, though the exact timeline remains unclear. Friends reported that by 1987, the changes were becoming impossible to ignore. His energy flagged, his weight dropped. The man who had once commanded Wembley Stadium with 72,000 fans singing Bohemian Rhapsody back to him was struggling to get through recording sessions. Yet Mercury continued working with an almost manic determination, channeling what remained of his energy into recording sessions that would become Queen's final album with their original frontman. Songs like The Show Must Go On took on tragic new meaning. Mercury could barely stand during the vocal takes, but his voice remained powerful, defiant, even in the face of death. His partner, Jim Hutton, stayed by his side until the end, along with his former girlfriend and lifelong companion, Mary Austin, to whom he had left the bulk of his estate. In his will, Mercury called her his common-law wife, even though their romantic relationship had ended years before. The complex web of relationships he maintained: deep friendships, former lovers who remained devoted, bandmates who became brothers, spoke to his capacity for love in all its forms. When he died at his London home on the 24th of November 1991, at just 45 years old, Mercury left behind a legacy that transcended music. His death certificate listed bronchial pneumonia resulting from AIDS, making him one of the first major rock stars to have his AIDS diagnosis publicly confirmed. The tribute concert held in his memory at Wembley Stadium in April 1992 raised millions for AIDS research and was broadcast to over 1 billion people in 76 countries worldwide. Performers included Elton John, David Bowie, George Michael, and Guns N' Roses, a testament to Mercury's influence across musical genres and generations. The defector who danced until he couldn't. Rudolf Nureyev was more than a dancer. He was a cultural phenomenon. His 1,961 defection from the Soviet Union while touring with the Kirov Ballet made international headlines. At age 23, he literally jumped over a barrier at a Paris airport, choosing freedom over returning to the USSR. Nureyev brought a masculine power and raw sensuality to ballet that hadn't been seen before. His partnerships with Dame Margot Fonteyn became legendary, redefining what ballet could be. By the mid-1980 seconds, those close to Nureyev noticed changes. The dancer who once seemed to defy gravity began to struggle. His legendary stamina waned. Some attributed it to age, others suspected the truth but said nothing. Nureyev continued performing even as the disease progressed, making his final stage appearance in October 1992. He died in Paris on the 6th of January 1993, officially from cardiac complications, though those close to him knew the real cause. Only later would the full truth emerge about what had killed one of the century's greatest dancers, the photographer who made beauty from darkness. Robert Mapplethorpe's photography had always courted controversy. His images explored desire, power, and beauty in ways that made many uncomfortable. Born in Queens in 1946, Mapplethorpe moved through the artistic underground of New York, particularly in the vibrant downtown scene of the 1970 seconds and 80 seconds. He was diagnosed with HIV in 1986, when such a diagnosis was essentially a death sentence. But rather than retreat, Mapplethorpe doubled down on his work. His final self-portrait, taken in 1988, shows a gaunt face emerging from darkness, his hand gripping a cane topped with a skull, an image of defiance and acceptance simultaneously. He died on the 9th of March, 1989, at age 42. Shortly before his death, he established the Robert Mapplethorpe Foundation, dedicating its resources to AIDS research and photography. He was one of the first major artists to openly connect his work with the AIDS crisis. The artist who drew hope on subway walls. Keith Haring painted joy with simple stick figures and radiant babies that became symbols of 1980 seconds New York. He began drawing in the subway, creating impromptu works on blank advertising panels. These chalk drawings brought art directly to the public. As the AIDS crisis decimated his community, Haring used his art to raise awareness and funds. His Ignorance Equals Fear poster from 1989 became an iconic image of AIDS activism. Haring was diagnosed with AIDS in 1988 at age 29. Rather than slow down, he accelerated, creating as much work as possible. He established the Keith Haring Foundation in 1989 to support AIDS organizations and children's programs. He died on the 16th of February 1990 at age 31. His death represented the loss of young artists at the very beginning of their creative lives, decades of potential creativity stolen from the world. The science fiction giant brought down by modern medicine. Isaac Asimov seemed an unlikely victim of the AIDS epidemic. The prolific science fiction writer had written over 500 books. His Foundation series revolutionized the genre. But in 1983, during a triple bypass operation, he received a blood transfusion, and in that transfusion, he received HIV. Blood banks weren't yet screening for the virus. Thousands contracted HIV through transfusions in the early 1980 seconds. Asimov's health began declining in the late 1980 seconds, but his diagnosis was kept quiet, fearing the stigma. He died on the 6th of April 1992 at age 72. His death certificate listed heart and kidney failure, technically true, but omitting the underlying cause. The full truth wouldn't emerge until 10 years later, when his wife published her memoir. The irony was profound. Asimov, a scientist who had spent his career advocating for reason and truth, had his own cause of death hidden because of fear and stigma. The matinee idol who changed everything. Rock Hudson's death on the 2nd of October 1985 was the moment America could no longer ignore AIDS. Here was a Hollywood leading man who had epitomized masculine attractiveness for decades, wasting away from a disease most people associated with marginalized communities. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in 1925, Hudson embodied the idealized American man of the 1950 seconds and 60 seconds. He starred in romantic comedies opposite Doris Day and in the television series Macmillan and Wife. But Hudson lived a double life. Throughout his career, he maintained relationships with men, while his studio carefully constructed a heteronormative public image. In 1955, his agent arranged for him to marry his secretary to quell rumors. The marriage lasted 3 years. In July 1985, his publicist confirmed that Hudson had AIDS, the first time a major celebrity had publicly acknowledged having the disease. The announcement was shocking. Suddenly, AIDS was affecting Rock Hudson, someone America had invited into their living rooms for decades. Elizabeth Taylor immediately mobilized, helping to organize the first major AIDS fundraiser in Hollywood. President Reagan, who had remained largely silent on AIDS despite the epidemic raging for 4 years, finally mentioned the disease publicly. Hudson died at his Beverly Hills home on the 2nd of October 1985, at age 59, only 67 days after his public announcement. But in those 67 days, he made AIDS real to millions of Americans who had been ignoring it. The boy next door. Who wasn't? Robert Reed seemed to be America's perfect father. As Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, he presided over one of television's most wholesome families from 1969 to 1974. But Reed's real life bore little resemblance to his television persona. Born in 1932, Reed was a serious actor who had studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. He was also a deeply private man, hiding fundamental truths about himself. Reed died on the 12th of May 1992 at age 59. His death certificate initially listed colon cancer, but was later amended to include HIV infection. Even in death, there had been an attempt to maintain the privacy he guarded so carefully in life. The good girl who got unlucky. Amanda Blake was best known for playing Miss Kitty Russell on Gunsmoke for 19 years. She was married 4 times and was a passionate animal rights activist. In the late 1980 seconds, Blake's health declined. She was diagnosed with AIDS, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. Blake died on the 16th of August 1989 at age 60. Her case helped challenge the stereotype that AIDS only affected certain populations. The philosopher who questioned everything. Michel Foucault was one of the 20th century's most influential thinkers. His works on power, knowledge, and identity revolutionized philosophy and sociology. Born in 1926 France, Foucault had a brilliant academic career. He died on the 25th of June 1984, becoming one of the first prominent French figures to die of AIDS. His work on how power operates through medical and social institutions became even more relevant in the context of the AIDS crisis. The tennis champion who fought his final match. Arthur Ashe was the first African-American man to win Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, and the Australian Open. After retiring in 1980, he underwent heart surgery in 1983, receiving blood transfusions during the procedure. Like Asimov, Ashe contracted HIV from contaminated blood. He was diagnosed with AIDS in 1988 but kept it private for 4 years. In April 1992, a newspaper contacted him about the diagnosis. Rather than let someone else control the narrative, Ashe held a press conference announcing that he had AIDS. He used his remaining time to become an AIDS activist, founding the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health. He died on the 6th of February 1993 at age 49. His case highlighted the thousands who contracted HIV through medical procedures without any traditional risk factors. The rapper who went from ruthless to reckless. Eric Wright, known as Eazy-E, was a founding member of NWA, the pioneering gangster rap group. As founder of Ruthless Records, he was also a successful businessman. In February 1995, Eazy-E was admitted to the hospital with what he thought was asthma. Instead, doctors diagnosed him with AIDS in such an advanced stage that his condition was already critical. On March 16, he issued a public statement urging people to get tested. Less than 2 weeks later, on the 26th of March 1995, Eazy-E died at age 30. His death brought AIDS awareness to hip-hop in a way previous celebrity deaths hadn't. If he had been diagnosed earlier, he might have lived decades longer. The Israeli icon who sang until the end. Ofra Haza rose from poverty in Tel Aviv to become one of Israel's most beloved performers. Her fusion of traditional Yemeni music with contemporary pop created a unique sound that transcended cultural boundaries. She died on the 23rd of February 2000, at age 42. Her family initially denied she had died of AIDS-related complications, but later reports confirmed it. Her death shocked Israel and reflected the continued stigma surrounding AIDS, even at the turn of the century. The psycho star who couldn't escape his past. Anthony Perkins will forever be remembered as Norman Bates in Psycho. That 1960 film made him a star but also typecast him permanently. Perkins's personal life was complex. He had relationships with men throughout his early career, but in the 1,970 seconds, underwent conversion therapy. In 1973, he married photographer Barry Berenson, and they had two sons. In the mid-1,980 seconds, Perkins tested positive for HIV but kept the diagnosis secret. He died at his Los Angeles home on the 12th of September, 1992, at age 60, from AIDS-related pneumonia. The Liberace paradox. Liberace's performances were spectacles of flamboyant excess. Yet he successfully sued a British tabloid in 1959 when they implied he was romantically involved with men, testifying under oath that the insinuations were false. By early 1987, he was seriously ill, though his publicists denied rumors of AIDS. Liberace died on the 4th of February 1987, at age 67. The county coroner announced he had died from AIDS-related pneumonia, sparking immediate controversy. The woman who chose her own ending. Cookie Mueller was a writer, actress, and counterculture icon who appeared in John Waters' films. She was part of the artistic underground in Baltimore and New York. Mueller tested positive for HIV and approached it with dark humor and defiant creativity. On the 10th of November, 1989, at age 40, Cookie Mueller died. Her partner, Sharon Neesp, died just 2 days later. They had nursed each other through the final stages. The silent killer no one saw coming. And here's where we arrive at the truth I promised you at the beginning. The real killer wasn't just HIV. The real killer was silence. Every single person on this list died because society chose not to talk about intimate health, not to fund research, not to treat certain communities as worthy of protection. They died because presidents refused to say AIDS for years while thousands perished. They died because religious leaders called it divine punishment. Rock Hudson died in 1985, but President Reagan didn't give a major speech about AIDS until 1987, by which point over 20,000 Americans had already died. The administration slashed research budgets while the epidemic raged. Officials joked about it in press briefings. Meanwhile, in cities like San Francisco and New York, entire neighborhoods were decimated. The disease was framed as affecting only certain populations, as if that made it less worthy of attention. The breakthrough treatments that would transform HIV from a death sentence to a manageable illness didn't arrive until 1996. By then, more than 360,000 Americans had died. If research had been funded earlier, many people on this list might still be alive. But silence couldn't kill activism. ACT UP formed in 1987 and used dramatic direct action to force change. They staged die-ins, shut down the stock exchange, interrupted conferences. Their motto, "Silence equals death," became iconic. These activists fundamentally changed how drugs are tested and approved in America. They made AIDS impossible to ignore. Remember that photograph I mentioned? The one of Freddie Mercury in his hospital bed? Here's the thing. That photograph doesn't exist. Or if it does, it's remained private, as his family wished. But what does exist are thousands of photographs from that era hidden away, considered too disturbing or too political. The secret was how thoroughly society tried to hide the entire epidemic. The missing photographs, the altered death certificates, the euphemisms, and the final revelation? It's that this didn't have to happen. The technology existed to identify the virus sooner. The knowledge existed to implement safer practices. The money existed. What didn't exist was the will to treat certain communities as worth saving. Every person on this list died not just from a virus, but from a society that valued some lives more than others. They died from stigma and silence, and the kind of indifference that lets preventable tragedies become catastrophes. Today, someone diagnosed with HIV who receives proper treatment can live a normal lifespan. We have the tools to end the epidemic entirely. Yet globally, 630,000 people died of AIDS-related illnesses in 2022. The stigma, while lessened, hasn't disappeared. These 17 people, and the millions more they represent, didn't die in vain if we learn from their deaths. If we build a world where epidemics are met with science and compassion, rather than fear and blame, say their names, tell their stories, and make sure this never happens again.